Sanibonani nonke, siyabonga kakhulu ukuthi nibe nathi kulolu suku lanamhlanje. Thank you very much for logging in and joining our session for today. The title of our session is the Translation Dialogue. So even though we're working with, we'll be making reference to two languages, which is English and IsiZulu, we believe that you'll be able to draw similarities as well as parallels with other languages. My name is Phindile Dlamini, Umamsomi, and I am in conversation with Prof. Nkosinathi Sithole, as well as Dr. Nakanjani Sibiya. Abafowethu engibahlonipha kakhulu. Abadinga ngisho ukwethulwa laba bafowethu because of the work that they have done within the language space. Both panelists are authors. They have written lots and lots of literary works. Uma singawubala leyo msebenzi ngingashona ilanga. And they are also language specialists, and they have worked with English and IsiZulu. But most importantly, today, they are seasoned translators, and that is why they are here with us today talking about translation. They are seasoned translators, and they have translated different types of texts. In terms of language, we will be using English and IsiZulu, so feel free to, if you want to ask a question or you want to make a comment, you can make it in any of the two languages. We will be happy, as this is a dialogue, we will be happy to get input from you, and also the input can come in any of the two languages. You can either use the Q&A or you can use the chat. Right. Boputibam, Soto, Mondis, Siyabonga kakhulu ukuthi nibe nathi namhlanje. I have had a number of conversations with you pertaining to the work that we will be talking about today. And you told me that a few years ago, you were part of a group of translators that were commissioned to translate some literary works, which are classics. And we've spoken about this, this project a number of times, but now for the benefit of the audience, can you just please just give us a brief about the background? Let's just talk about the background of this project that you were commissioned to do. Ngicela ungene lapho Nkosinathi Budwana. Nkosinathi, can you hear me? Mondes.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Okay, can you just please give us a brief background about the projects that you were commissioned to do a few years ago, the projects that we have been speaking about, which is of reference today?
Yes. Okay, the project actually started in 2016. We're called
Apologies for that. We are having challenges with technology. I believe Apologies for the technical glitch. Saxolisa kakhulu ukuxhakaxhaka abuvumi kahle namhlanje. Mondesi, you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Yes, can you please just elaborate briefly on the background of this project?
Yeah, okay. So the project started in 2016. I think that you were called to a workshop around September 2016, where the whole thing was officially started. And the project was run by, the coordinator was Anki Cross from the University of the Western Cape, the Center for Multilingualism and Diversities Research. That's where the project was run. And it was funded by the National Institute of the Humanities and Social Sciences. So what happened was we were called to the meeting. So Anki called the people that she knew who were working in African languages who could do this. So she called us and we had this workshop where we had a discussion about what was intended, the plan, and then decisions were made about the books that were going to be translated, and there was some discussion about translation. I think there's some kind of theories and stuff, and then the project started. So when we left that workshop, everyone had a book that they were going to translate. Sometimes a book would be translated by more than one person. I was going to translate one IsiZulu book, and Nakanjani was going to translate another one. And there were other two isiXhosa novels and two Sesotho. There's one Sesotho novel and one drama, Sesotho drama. Then there was a novel from Sesotho Saleboa, then a poetry anthology. All in all, it was 8 texts that were translated from African languages to English, and they were published by Oxford University Press in 2018.
Wow, thank you so much. Mondesi, ngizocela nje ukuthi sikhulume nawe for now whilst we're still waiting for Nakanjani Sibiya to join us. So we're just going to carry on conversation with Nkosinathi Sithole. So Nkosinathi, you were commissioned to do this job. Did you have to prove that you're the best man for the job, or they just took for granted that as a language specialist, you are the suitable person to do the job?
I think that the fact that they didn't just approach anyone. They approached us because we had, in a way, proven records, because I'd done, for instance, Anki was working with Duncan Brown, who had worked with me. Like he knew that I'd done a lot of translation before. So I think that was the proof. It was your background, that you work in the language, but you have also done the work that you have done in the language. But there wasn't some kind of a test or anything. Those of us who were there, I think that were called because they thought we could do the job. So there was no need then to start doing other things to decide if we can do the job or not.
Lovely.
I don't know if that answers you. Yeah.
Thank you. And now you tell us that when everybody left with a book, and you've already told us that it was not only IsiZulu, it was books from different languages. So did you have a choice in terms of the genre or the book that you wanted to translate, or you were just the books were just handed to you?
Actually, that was the beauty of it. You had to choose the book that you wanted to do.
Lovely.
So because we were chosen like experts, so they took it for granted that we knew as people who were working like in the languages, we're using the languages, so we know a book, you know what happens in that field, so you could choose a book that you think is worth translating. And of course, the process was long. So we were talking like I think that in the first workshop, we spoke briefly about the books that we intended to translate and why we wanted to translate those books.
Okay, lovely. Whilst we were still waiting for Usotobe, we were just going to move on with your Mondise. Please allow us to do that. Now let's move on to the translation process. So here you are, you've left the meeting, you're at home now, you've got this book, this big job in front of you. Now, how did you approach this project? Like, where did you start? What did you do first? Just take us through the translation process. Oh yes, thank you very much. Usotobe is in now, so he will also be able to respond. But first, Mondise, can you just take us through the translation process when you already have the book in your hand?
Okay, for me it was easier. I think that would be possible. I think Nakanjani always said that his was the most difficult, and I think that mine was easiest. And the reason for that is, first of all, I chose the book that I was working on as an academic. I was writing an article on this book that I chose to translate. And I'd been reading the book. In order to write an article, you have to read the book many times. And I'd done some translating. You know, when you quote from a book, it's written in IsiZulu, and you're writing an article in English. So you have to do translations, those short translations. So what happened then was, because I was very familiar with the book, it was just a matter of setting time and then sitting down and starting the translation from page one, if you will. And it was a matter of translating a sentence, like sentence by sentence. That's what I did. And I think that what made my translation also easier, the experience I was talking about, because I knew some of the things that worked, because I'd been translating like for a long time. For instance, the people we were working with, some of them would spend like maybe 30 minutes just worrying about a word. But what I'll do is, and it's what I've been doing, that when I translate like a sentence per sentence. Then what happens is, if I find that there's something that I can't translate, I just make a note and then move on. So that maybe I just decide that, okay, I'm going to go this far, and then I can come back to whatever didn't work, or maybe I have to consult the dictionary, or maybe I just finish a chapter and then go to the places where there were words that were problematic, then I deal with that. I think that was the process for me.
Sotobe, thank you so much for logging in. If you may come in here, we're talking about the translation process. We understand that each one of you had a book in hand when you left that commissioning meeting, and we just want to find out, like, where did you start with the translation process? What did you do first? If you can just take us through that process.
Good day. My task was to translate a novel by M.J. Mngadi. The title, IsiZulu title was Asikondawo Baggage. As Nkosinathi has alluded to, we were approached by Professor Groch, the coordinator and the project leader. And in my case, initially, the translation was supposed to be done by Professor Ntuli, but his hands were full, and he suggested that I do the translation. I was reluctant at first because I thought it was a daunting task to translate the novel, but seemingly they had some faith in me and decided to join the team. They had suggested I translate a novel by B.W. Villiers, but then I felt that we there had to be some balance between the classics and the contemporary works. So hence my decision to translate Asikondawo Bagit into isiZulu. Well, the approach was that we had to do a literary translation, not necessarily a technical one. One has to flow with the original text, the words, the word choices that were used by the author, and trying to see how one can present that in English. So one was guided by the complexity of the text, how the author plays with words and so forth, and try to express that in English as close as possible to the original text, source text, to use the yes.
Okay, siyabonga kakhulu, Yes, thank you so much. Now, you know what, a number of translation scholars, they always, they actually concur that translating across different language families can be quite daunting and very stressful. I think this is because of the differences in terms of the linguistic systems, the differences in terms of the culture, and also in terms of the way we use certain words. So now, now that you've translated this work as well as other works, would you agree that it is stressful? It is indeed a stressful exercise when you have to translate across different language families. Mondes, if we can start with you.
Yes, it is. It's not easy. It's not just something that you can take lightly. But it also depends on the text, because even the text in your language, some are less accessible because of the way they use the language. Because I think that the main thing about translation and translating is that you have to understand the text first. So if the text is inaccessible, like it's very difficult to make sense of the text itself, then it becomes very difficult to translate. Okay, sometimes it's not easy to translate also because of the way in which it is written. But for me, I'm just going to talk about my case. My case with Nomanini, for instance, because I've chosen it. It's different, for instance, when we are choosing, or we've chosen a book that you have to translate, maybe because of the use of language, for instance, because maybe we want to try and represent that in the target language. But for me, it was the story. So I knew that if I understood, because I chose normally because of the powerful story, the way in which it answers some questions that I'm having as a scholar of African languages, and also literature written by African writers in English. So for me, then it was a matter of understanding what is being said there and trying and using the command of the English language that I have to translate that, to make that be understandable in the English language. So I think that it just depends on the kind of text and what you are trying to do as a translator, what's important to you.
Okay, and what I can also read from what you're telling us, Mondisa, is that it actually depends on your linguistic competence. Like you saying that you have to draw from your knowledge of the language, your knowledge of English, as well as your knowledge of isiZulu. So it means that for you to be a good translator, you definitely need to have a high linguistic competence. Would you agree with that, Sithole?
Yes, of course. Yes, it's imperative that a translator is in command to the best of his ability, in good command of the two languages. Otherwise, a lot would be lost in translation. Perhaps you are translating from your mother tongue, but there are some nuances that you misunderstand or you are not familiar with, and then the translation will rely on your ability to understand your mother tongue first before. So in other words, it's not something that can be done by anybody for that matter. It's not a given that as long as you speak your mother tongue fluently, you can be a good translator. It has its own skills, its own art that one has to possess, so that their translation can be. One has to be creative as well, so that in both languages, for that matter. While one cannot say it's stressful, of course, it's stressful given the time frames that will have to be satisfied. I think one can say it's a frustrating exercise, particularly when it comes to fine nuances of the language. For instance, you may understand your IsiZulu and speak it quite well, but then you will find that there are always some limitations to your English because it's not your mother tongue. For instance, in the use of certain expressions, idiomatic expressions, for instance, in my case, well, there will always be room for editorial interventions. For instance, in my case, you will find that some words or expressions that you know at second language level, you will find that they are not relevant for the text that you are translating. For instance, there was a case where I used an expression to bury the hatchet. And then the editor said, no, the hatchet is not necessarily a South African concept. They said, who buries a hatchet now? So we had to look for an equivalent expression. But in my case, I thought I had nailed the translation, given the context, only to find that the mother tongue speakers of will not agree with that. But then there is always room for correction, because we are not necessarily doing this on your own. It will pass through some other eyes and hands as well. Ngakho-ke kungase kuthiwa umsebenzi oyinselelo, kodwa kuba mnandi uma njengoba eshilo umondisi, uma uzikhathela wena uhlobo lombhalo ozohumusha. Kungase kuhluphe ngenkathi uma kuwumbhalo ofunzwe wona nje, ongase kungabi lula mhlawumbe ukuthi mhlawumbe ungawuthandi kwakuthanda uhumushe nje nawe ngisokuthi uhudula ngoba mhlawumbe kuthiwe kunenkece ozoyithola noma kufanele umsebenzi kuphela. Kodwa in our case, we enjoyed the journey because particularly because most of us were in this project were writers themselves, so they were not intimidated by long words or by long texts, because love came first, and then we were able to be guided through the process, linguistically and otherwise.
Wow, siyabonga kakhulu Sotobe. What is coming out of your discussion, like you've said a mouthful, but what is coming out, and what I think is actually important to note, is that not everyone can translate. The fact that I know English and IsiZulu does not make me a translator. And also what you're bringing forward is the fact that, okay, the first one is that not anyone can translate. and also the other points that you are bringing forward. Okay, I've just forgotten that point, but I will come back to it. Now coming to the challenges, you've already given us a number of challenges that you came across, challenges in terms of the idioms and in terms of the linguistic forms. Were there any other challenges maybe in terms of culture, cultural challenges in the text that you had to deal with? Did you come across any such challenges?
Is that for me?
Yes. Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. I think the main challenge, because when I translate, I have in mind the audience, and I know that it's people for whom the culture is foreign. Okay, but I'm also not trying to make this too familiar to them. I'm just looking for the word. But the point is, I think that my approach is that whenever a person reads an English text that is translated, so they come across things that remind them that this is actually something that was created in that particular context. Okay, so I didn't worry about the culture. All I was worried about, or I was interested in, was to try and just create a picture. For instance, actually the thing that I did, and I'm going to make examples of, is the idioms, because they were one of the things that were interesting about Nomaneni. In fact, in the introduction to the book, I made a statement that I think this text and many of the texts that we were translating actually anticipated texts like Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And I've always had a problem with people saying that Things Fall Apart or Chinua Achebe is the father of African literature, because the engagement with what they call the poetics of the crossroads, or the encounter between Africa and the West, that Chinua Achebe deals with, is dealt with in Nomaneni. And Vilakazi in Nomaneni celebrates the African language, the beauty of the African language, by using idioms and proverbs. So what I did then was to try and keep the proverb. And I'm just going to try and expand on this by keeping the proverb. So I didn't try to find an equivalent. I wanted the person who reads to know that this is an IsiZulu idiom. It is given in English for me as a non-IsiZulu speaker to understand. And sometimes that would have problems. Like, for instance, so a person, like there was an instance where they were talking about someone who was going to pee. And we know that there's an expression in IsiZulu which says, if you pitamans. Now it becomes problematic, because what if you say pitamanzi, you can just pour out water, like it may be from the basin. So it creates a problem. When I was translating this, I just, instead of pitamanzi, I said to pour out, went to the fence to pour out water. And the editors found that difficult. And as Sibiya was saying, it helps that because my mother tongue is IsiZulu, English isn't my mother tongue. So you have an editor that looks at the thing for these people who are not speakers of the language, and they're like, okay, this is not working, and I understood. So we ended up with releasing some bladder water at the fence, because the idea was not to do away with the idiom, had to try and make it clear that it's an IsiZulu idiom, but it should be understandable to the person who is reading and is not familiar with IsiZulu. But there are times when there's this also idiom that was used, if I still have time, ukuthungelwa ocansini ngomkhonto, which was perfect because then I could just say knitted to the sitting mat by the spear, because then there was no confusion. No one would misunderstand that or mistake this for something else, like the case of Ukitamanzi. So in that case, I just translated that, but I think that they're the things that we because the thing about doing this work is what challenges you is what is interesting. So we are interested by what is actually challenging.
Okay. Siyabonga kakhulu, Mondise. You've also given us quite a mouthful there. And what is coming out of your contribution is that literary works abounds in proverbs, abounds in cultural aspects, as well as in idioms. So what is important here is the context. So if you're translating, you have to take note of the context and also the meaning, the underlying meaning behind those words. And now if I go back to what Sotobe said earlier, I have remembered, there's an old Chinese adage that says, the faintest ink is better than the sharpest memory. So now I am noting down stuff that I want to talk about instead of trying to keep it in my brain. I wanted to talk about the passion that what also came out of your contribution, Sotobe, is that you need to be driven by passion in order for you to give your best in the translation process. So passion is also very important. You must just love words. You must not just do it for money. Right, now moving on, Mondisa, let's come back to you again here. We have people or scholars that say that there's a difference between translating into your mother tongue as well as translating out of your mother tongue. And they even caution that it's always best, or the translators perform best when they translate into their mother tongue, because they've got a wider pool of vocabulary, they've got a wider pool of all the nuances and everything that you need to use when you're translating. So now what is interesting with this project is that you were translating from your mother tongue into a new language. You have alluded to that slightly in your previous contribution on this side. Can you just elaborate more on that? Like, did you come across any challenges and then you thought, if I was translating into my mother tongue, I was not going to come across these challenges? Can you just tell us more about that?
I think, like I alluded to the translation experience that I've had, and most of it has always been translating from IsiZulu to English. Okay, so that's the most translation that I've done anyway. So and you know that when we do something over and over again, it gets better, it gets easier. But having said that, I think that there's some sense in that statement. Okay, you can imagine that, okay, it's your language. So the challenges that you encounter when you have to say things in this other language that is not your language. I mean, that's the thing. You can't stop and say, it would be better if I was translating to my language or to my mother tongue. But even though I've done most of translating from IsiZulu to English, I have translated from English to IsiZulu, and I don't think that it's necessarily that easy as well, because we are still translating. And I think that the question of the idiom and the cultural aspect, even the language, because the languages are different. Sometimes you can see that your knowledge of the mother tongue doesn't help because you don't have an equivalent. I remember that I used to work with the people in it was called the School of IsiZulu at that time in UK that I was working with, Babonchanga and Babusengwa, and they would have translation maybe from the government where you were translating from English to IsiZulu. And that was not that necessarily easy because there were terms like you had to coin words in IsiZulu for terms in English, and that is not easy. If the languages were like the English and IsiZulu were just different languages, like we have every equivalent of an English expression, an English word in IsiZulu, it would be better. But what makes it difficult is that there are many things that you find in English that you don't have in IsiZulu, that you have to do something about. You have to find a new term or use the terms that are there to try and capture the meaning. And that is not necessarily easy.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. So according to you, it doesn't really matter. It's no big deal that you're translating into or out. Both have its own challenges.
Yeah.
Right. Moving on now, let's get practical. Is it possible that you can just read us an excerpt from your work so that we've been talking about you did this, you did that, you changed this, you changed that. But now we just want to listen to some of the work that you did. If you can just first read the source text and then just read that paragraph when you had already translated, so that you can see how you manipulated the language in order to get the best product.
Oh,
Yeah, Basodov.
Yes. I was unfortunate that I chose Mngadi to translate. And I always told my colleagues that there were times when I regretted choosing the text because Mngadi indlela ayibhala ngayo ubecikoza kakhulu amagama ajwayelekile. So one had to pitch the translation ibe level yokucikoza kaMadlokovu. So it was not just simply words. He used words. So the challenge was to do justice to the source text in terms of style and all that. So it was not just ordinary sentences. Mngadi's sentences were long, even if in cases where he used just short sentences, you could not just translate them word for word. Otherwise, the translation will not reach the level of the original. In terms of my favorite passage is where in the text where Mngadi said, perhaps angifunde paragraph yonke. Let me read the paragraph and see where Mngadi used few words and how difficult I found them to translate. Uma esepasijini iso lakhe wathi uma eliphonsa ngaphakathi ekamelweni elalilala odubazana waqikileka emangele. Wayemangazwa ukubona uMazoni ezenwaya ngokuzikhuhla echosheni lewadilophu. Ngcono amsize. Sagcina isandla senwaya, sachilizwa, sabuyiswa, sabanjwa, kwacinyezwa. Sagcina isandla senwaya, sachilizwa, sabuyiswa, sabanjwa, kwacinyezwa. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. So you can't say the hand eventually done. So, but let's see, because this sentence was a turning point in the novel where the characters fell into temptation, and that affected how events later unfolded in the text. So I decided to avoid word-for-word translation to capture the mood and the tone of the text. So I decided to say, his hand quivers as his soft fingers delicately trace her back. She pushes it away. It pauses for a few seconds, but soon resumes its journey and lingers when she gently squeezes it as their eyes close simultaneously. So 7 words became some 13 words. So, but for me, it was essential to make the reader imagine how this event occurred instead of using, because had I used the same 7 words in English, the mood wouldn't have been captured. So in translating, it is not only a matter of getting equivalence. One has to capture the style of the author as well, the tone and the mood. Ukuthi ukube umbhali ubezishumushela yena lo msebenzi ngoba naye uyasazi ukuthi ubezosho amagama afanayo nawasho esiZulu, mhlawumbe ubezobeka ngomunye umqondo ukuze aveze ukucikoza. So that is one of the major challenges, that we are not only dealing with vocabulary. You don't always need a dictionary. You have to be creative as well, so that the next reader will not need the original. The translation will be as natural as possible, so that source text, they should be satisfied with the translation. Not because we can't appreciate what is in front of us. What was the original? So I felt that as far as I could, did some justice to the source text in that case.
Wow, Sithole, siyabonga kakhulu. That was quite evocative, you know. Emqondweni usuyaqala wakhe isithombe sakho ukuthi igazi kwakwenzakalani lapha. That was a beautiful piece. Thank you for sharing that with us. We did have a hand up, and now I've got a question. I'm not sure whether it's the same person that had the hand up who is now asking the question. But let me go to Unosipho. Nosipho, can you please ask a question, or is it a question or a comment? You can unmute yourself. Okay, we've got Nosipho here, but maybe she's unable to unmute herself. Let's go to the question then. We've got a question from Zet Machoba, and the question is, when does one lose meaning in translation? There have been ongoing debates about translation and interpretation. Can you elaborate on this or differentiate based on your own views? Zet Machoba, I'm not sure whether you would like us to differentiate between translation and interpreting. Basically, the difference between the two, I'm also going to allow my panelists to come in here. But the basic difference between the two is that when stuff is written down, we say it's translation. But when it is verbal, we say it's interpreting. In isiZulu sithi siyahumusha uma sibhala phansi. So what our panel members were doing, babehumusha. Kanti uma ukhuluma sithi uyatolika. So that is how we differentiate between the two. We know that in the olden days, it all started as interpreting because it was all things verbal. But as we moved on and then saqala sabhala naphansi, and then we differentiated between the two because it does command, though the basic skills are the same, but the other skills are different. That, you know, when you're an interpreter, you need to hone these skills, and when you're a translator, you need to hone these skills. I'm not sure whether you'd like to come in, Sithole, Mondays. Does any one of you want to come in here?
No, you have been able to capture the difference between the two. In translation, it's a textual exercise, whereas Toliga is more. What one can look at are the challenges between translation and interpreting, because in the case of interpreting, everything is immediate, and one has to decide. One has to think on one's face, on one's feet. Whereas in translation, you have an advantage in that you can pause and consider your options and check your dictionary or seek advice from other language users. Whereas in interpretation, one has to be eloquent, and one has to have unlimited vocabulary if I were used to those. So interpreting is more demanding than translation in terms of delivery. When do you deliver the translation? Translation unaso isikhathi esanele sokukhetha amazwi ongase uhumushe ngawo. Kanti makudoliwa kusuke ngabhenya inswana, kusuke kufanele ngabe umuntu ozokwazi ukwenza umsebenzi.
Right, thank you. Mandisa, would you like to come in?
I'm just pondering the other part of the question. I think that we've said all that can be said about interpreting and translation. But about when something gets lost in translation. And I think that there is a part of the process that does create something new and something that you cannot deny. So I'm not for things getting lost in translation that much, because we know that, for instance, Vilakazi wrote an IsiZulu book, and it is there. So what I'm trying to do is to help the person who doesn't understand IsiZulu to get a sense of what is in that book. So there is no way, as Sibiya was saying, that sometimes it helps that you are also a writer and you want to create that sense of creativity in the other book that you are creating, in the target language, or the new book in English in this case. So it's not the question of losing anything. You know that some people, if I may raise this, were saying that, we're claiming that in translating books from African languages to English, you are exploiting African language. One person asked or commented to the coordinator that I was talking about, Andy Groff, that what we have been doing was actually exploiting African languages. But my response is, when you translate, you are creating something that is, you are, I think that someone said, and I'm just paraphrasing this, that you are giving a text, the original text, a new life in the language. So it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to have everything, because this is written in a different language, And the people who are going to read it are not the same people who would read the original. So my response would be that people should remember that the fact that you have translated a text, it doesn't mean you have done away with the original. You have, no matter when, that I've translated. It comes from, it is built from the text Nomanini that Vilakazi created. But it doesn't mean that if you want to read Nomanini, if you can read Nomanini. But this is for people who would not have been able to get the story that Vilakazi has written, to appreciate his writing ability. It's what you do. So something being lost in translation, I don't understand. I think that translation is part of a translator interpreting or giving his understanding of what the original is. That is why it happens that I talked about the poems, for instance. Some of the poems that were translated in this project were retranslations. They were translated before, but someone would say, well, this is how I take this text, this poem for me, I understand it like this. So if I were to translate it, I would translate it this way. And I'm not going to say, okay, your translation is bad, mine is better. They're just different.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't even want to add to what both my panelists have given us, because I think it just covers everything. And thank you for this question. Again, I think Mawandla wanted to ask a question. Otherwise, we will carry on, and maybe she will come back again, or he will come back again. Right, Mondisa, you've already mentioned this issue of someone saying that you are exploiting the language and saying it in a very negative sense. Well, siyazi abantu abayingangxanye bengemanzi. Most people get excited when a new world is opened up for them, and you can only open the new world. You can also open the new world through translation, because for us to learn about other cultures, we get to learn about that through translation. So is there something more that you want to say as a response to that thinking that when you translate, you are actually taking away? It's like you are taking away something that is so precious and you're just hanging it out there for everyone.
Yes, what I can also say about the value of the project is that even I, as a person who uses, like my mother tongue is IsiZulu, and there are books here that are written in Sotho that I didn't have access to before they are translated. Now I can read them. So it's not just for people who don't use African languages or the English speakers. This is done for everyone. It's a way of sharing what is there. And it's also important because many people have said things about African languages, that the literature in African languages is childish, is immature, because they don't know what is happening there. So now people are able to share, are able to read, to appreciate what African writers who were writing in their mother tongue were doing, which is, I think they're very good. All the books here, they prove wrong the claim that African writers who write in African languages are not good enough. And the project makes it possible for us, even us African language people who know one or two languages, now can have access to more than the things that were written in the languages that we understand.
Now, coming back to you, Sithole, you did share with us how you started off the project. And now, in terms of wrapping it all up, before handing it over to the editor, Do you remember how many times you read it and how many times you changed something or changed the other? And were you happy with the final product when you handed it over to the project leader?
Yes, I was happy with the final product, but then, as any translator would tell you, a translation that you did some 5 years ago, you will still like to revisit it because it's a creative process. Some words visit you later after we have sent the text. In some cases, you forget words, either in English or in so in my case, I did my best. I've always, it was a very moving text that I was translating, and it was 90,000 word in terms of length. So it was a huge. One could not have the liberty of revisiting words and others. There were deadlines to meet, but then there was that allowance of interaction between editor and translator. There were ongoing workshops where we sat as a group and discuss our text, read from passages, and ask questions from others. How can I express this in English? So there was that guidance that one could rely on in terms of. So in some cases, you would do the translation looking at your watch and then say, but as soon as it reaches the editors, we can still get enough time. In some cases, you have to explain your translation to the editor. This is why I chose this instead of this word. In some cases, you will ask your colleagues, guys, is this the correct way of saying or of translating this? So in my case, there was enough time to revisit passages where either the editors were not happy with the translation. In some cases, we would argue with the translators. They'll say, no, we don't understand this. And I would say, this is how the author expressed this. Let us put it that way. And in our case, we were fortunate that one workshop, we also had Umgadi with us. So he also had to, not necessarily as a translator, but he also had to express his own sentiments about how we chose to translate his text. So I was happy with the fact I was done. The translation reduced me to tears. That's how powerful Mongadi's work was. So I was, I felt honored to be entrusted with such a project. And Nkosinathi will agree with me that some tears were shed by the non-mother tongue speakers of the language when we read passages that had been translated into English, because they were now exposed to things that they were not familiar with, particularly white people, for instance, because the novel is about challenges of finding accommodation for a black person at that time. They did not know the things that happen in squatter camps, for instance, the day-to-day challenges that face during political violence, for instance, how a person is neglected, how some mob justice, for instance, gang rape, for instance. So it was an engaging test, both in terms of translating it and also in reading it as a work of art.
So, thank you so much, Bobutbami. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. Translation is such a big thing, and especially nowadays, it's very important that we talk about translation, because there's so many things that are happening that needs to be translated. I just want to check if Dr. Loli Makubo-Badenhurst is in the house. Okay. All right. If you may allow me, the team, if I can. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Can you just allow, we are running out of time. We did have some glitches earlier on. We're running out of time now. If you can just come in and just share with us what you've got.
Well, thank you so much. Firstly, let me say thank you, our program director, and also then thank the translators. So we as the Translators Institute, the South African Translators Institute, and as you know, SATI is national, and also we have the KZN SATI chapter, and I'm currently the chairperson of the KZN SATI chapter, the KwaZulu-Natal SATI chapter. But let me just say that, the issues that are raised by the translators, they sound familiar. And if it's the word of consolation, even after the effect, when, he says that he was reduced to tears, that, then you are a good translator. And, each and every translator, whenever we're doing translations, no translator will always say that, this is the perfect work. You always feel inadequate and really feel that, I can do better. But, because of time constraints and other reasons, then you do that. But, let me commend both of you for the wonderful work that you do. And the things that we are faced with, well, SATI, because the name, it says South African Translators Institute, we do not necessarily deal with translations only. We also do with translation and interpreting. Njengoba nazi-ke bakwethu abantu cha basakudida lokho. They get ukwenza umehluko phakathi kwe-translation and interpreting. And I'm glad that, throughout this discussion that came out. But most importantly, what I want to talk about is the role of Ilokunjana ISATI with time of the writer and also in literary. So, and when you were citing Sotobe and reading the passage, when you teach translation as well, the students become confused between literally and literary. So the terms, at glance, they think that because this is in English is not our first language, it's our Amtin language. So the students become confused. So I'm glad that, you touched on saying that, when you say wardrobe, and that, you decided not to use literal translation, although you were doing literary work. You are translating literary work, meaning that it is a translation, a literary work, that is a book, and you did not apply literal translation. You had to use your imagination. You had to use all the things that you have as a translator yourself. And for that, it is commendable. And we really do encourage that, the set works that are there, we do not want to be selfish and just read them amongst ourselves. We want to share it widely, be it nationally and internationally. And then lastly, maybe that poses as a challenge to us as the KZN SATI chapter or as SATI, is that, we normally do the translation, the language combination of English and IsiZulu, English and isiXhosa, English and isiNdebele, meaning that in English, we always put English. But, I'm looking forward to a time where we can say that angisazi isiVenda. So why can't we take a translate amongst our African languages? Ngisuse kwisiSotho, ngisesiVendeni, ngisuse kwisiZulu, ngise kwisiVenda. But that is the topic and the discussion for another day. But let me just say thank you so much for the opportunity and sinfisela okuhle and yeah. Abathandayo ukuthi-ke bamjoyine uSathi ngoba uqhakambisa ukuhumusha nokutolika nani bangakhuluma naye Dr. Dlamini or maybe thereafter bangamcontacta. But ngithe nami cha ilaka lethu alizwakala ukuthi-ke uma ngabe kukhona ababhali abaphinde futhi bahumushe abenza umsebenzi omuhle kangaka nathi singasali ekubetuseni sincome umsebenzi omuhle kangaka. Siyabonga ngiyazi ukuthi time is against us, but let me just take a pause. I had prepared a presentation, but ngenxa yesikhathi-ke bakwethu-ke I'll take a pause and then thank you so much. Siyabonga, Program Director.
Siyabonga kakhulu Dokotela. I believe the team can hear what we're saying. I think next time we need about a day to just discuss, to have this translation dialogue, because even on my side here, I still have a list of questions that I still wanted to ask. But then there's this just burning one, which I would like the panelists to comment, just maybe in a sentence or two. Yesterday, when I was listening to one of the dramas, somebody said, "Imizi yahlephuka la ngaphandle." And now what I want to say is that we listen to translated news all the time. We read translated subtitles. What is your take in terms of what is happening around us with regards to translation? Just a sentence or two, just to wrap up. Mondes.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, sometimes I've also listened and looked at the captions, the subtitles, whatever they call it, when they do, a person is speaking, say in an African language, in IsiZulu in this case, and then there's English that is given there. And you wonder who does those translations because of the way in which, like, it doesn't seem to give what you understand from the original language. But it's something that can be dealt with, I'm sure, when people know where to go when they need to have work like translations done.
Okay, just a few words, sort of.
Yeah. It's a very sad thing that when people do translations, they do not consider experts to do the translations for them. In some cases, they just do them just for the sake of doing them. It's an insult in some cases where you see translation. For instance, I'll just make an example. There's an advert that says data, meaning you get unlimited data. But once you say data, data so you say that comes to lost in translation, because data it means something else. So the translation has to be respected. Each language is unique, and there is no language that is inferior to the other or superior. Languages are equal; they should be treated equally, because we always make sure that translations into English are perfect. But then when it comes to our languages, you just take any word and say translate this, and then it does not serve the purpose of communicating correctly with the target audience. So you get up here, so get asula izinto okufanele zilungiswa lezo ngoba zibulala ulimi nenhloso yabo abasuke befuna ukwenza okuthile ukudlulisa umyalezo. Ziyaxova nje, zikuxova impela nje, zizo zibaxoshe nabanye bagcina bengasayibuki into enama subtitles ngoba iyacasula.
Siyabonga kakhulu. Uyabona nje umuntu mesethi kahle, hayi kuvele kube henye into, kodwa ke sivele sivale lapho nje bobhuti bami. Mondisa Sotobe, siyabonga kakhulu nazo zonke izethameli zethu zanamhlanje and those who contributed. Dokotela Makhubu Badenhurst, siyabonga kakhulu. To the Time of the Writer and the audience, thank you for having us. And a big thank you goes to our sponsors who made sure that the Time of the Writer happens. A big thank you goes to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, to the National Department of Arts and Culture, to the KZN Departments of Arts and Culture, to the French Institute of South Africa, to the Stand Foundation, to the Foundation for Human Rights, and to the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, to Amazwi Museum for South African Literature, and also to our media partners, Imbiza Journal for African Writing. Let me just check if I've got them all. Siyabonga kakhulu, we've come to the end of our translation dialogue for today. Sihlushwa nje isikhathi. Thank you.